Welcome back to the Real News Network. We're joined again by Andrew Cockburn. He's the co-producer of the film, The American Casino, which he made with his wife, Leslie. Thanks for joining us again, Andrew.
Hey, good to be with you.
So there's an interesting exchange in the film. It's become quite famous now, with Alan Greenspan in front of a congressional committee, and we'll play it now.
Dr. Greenspan, you had an ideology. You had a belief that that free, competitive, and this is your statement, I do have an ideology. My judgment is that free, competitive markets are by far the unrivaled way to organize economies. We've tried regulation, none meaningfully worked. That was your quote. You had the authority to prevent irresponsible lending practices that led to the subprime mortgage crisis. You were advised to do so by many others, and now our whole economy is paying its price. Do you feel that your ideology push you to make decisions that you wish you had not made?
Well, remember that what an ideology is a conceptual framework with the way people deal with reality. Everyone has one. You have to exist, you need an ideology. The question is whether it is accurate or not. And what I'm saying to you is, yes, I found a flaw. I don't know how significant or permanent it is, but I've been very distressed by that fact. But if I may I just finish an answer to the question previously?
You found a flaw in the reality?
A flaw in the model that I perceived is the critical functioning structure that defines how the world works, so to speak.
In other words, you found that your view of the world, your ideology was not right. It was not working.
Precisely. No, that's precisely the reason I was shocked, because I've been going for 40 years or more with very considerable evidence that it was working exceptionally well.
So Greenspan says that it'd been working exceptionally well for 40 years. And when he says it, what exactly does he mean by it's been working exceptionally well?
Well, it was his idea, his fundamental, the model he pursued, his view of how the economy should be administered, which is basically hands-off, that you have, as light, as he would put it, as light a touch from the government, from regulation, from control from above as possible, and you leave the market to regulate itself. That the market will, if some bank is behaving stupidly, the market will correct that. This idea, this thing he worshipped, which was the idea that the market, this impersonal thing, is takes care of itself. And if you try and interfere with it, it only gums things up. Well, as it turned out, I mean, he admits in that exchange, this ludicrous figure, he says, he says there was a flaw in the model. Well, the flaw in the model was the global economy pretty much collapsed.
And he felt terrible, which was very reassuring for all of us.
Yeah, well, he didn't even feel terrible. He felt kind of he felt a bit bad about it, but the impression he gives, he's sort of mildly irritated. I didn't hear the word sorry. And the point is that what he'd been doing, he'd basically, he'd dedicate his career. Remember, for years, he was the most powerful man in Washington. Everyone kowtowed to him. He was called the maestro. There was a suck-up biography by Bob Woodward of the Washington Post.
Let's jump forward to today. Has this underlying ideology, which is Greenspan's term about all of this, that essentially speculation is good, that you see it again in the defense of these mega salaries on Wall Street. Has anything really changed? And in terms of what's on the table now at Congress and changing the regulatory environment, is there anything really on the table that would stop all this from happening again?
Well, in theory, yes. I mean, there's a bill making its way, or there's various bills in Congress, but Congress has said it's going to police up, re-regulate Wall Street. The trouble is, as Michael Greenberger, who you see in the film and you showed a clip of earlier, as he put it, told me the other day, he said there are 5 bank lobbyists for every member of Congress. So what you're seeing when you look at the actual bills that are coming out of Congress or being voted on, not what they're advertised as saying, but what they actually say, you find that the banks have actually, made an adjustment here, put in a paragraph there, and the net effect is that, nothing's changed.
Give us some examples.
Well, for example, there's a concept called the dark market, where for example, these credit default swaps that we talked about a little bit earlier, they're not traded on an exchange. You can't sort of switch, go to your computer and look up and see, like you can with a stock, with Apple stock or something like that. You can see the price. You always know what the price is. With a credit default swap, you don't know what the price is. No one does, and there's no general price. It's traded just between a dealer at JP Morgan Chase, sort of selling them to working on the phone. So it means that they can charge a huge spread between me buying a credit default swap and you selling one, and they get a huge gap in between. And this leads to all sorts of distortions in the market. That has a huge effect, and it enables the banks to make huge, huge profits, when such profits as they're making now are done that way. Well, Congress, quite rightly, thought this was a bad idea and thought these things should all be traded on a proper public exchange so we'd all know what was going on. And the banks have managed to smuggle in to get their lobbyists to put in the legislation. And I don't think, 99% of the congressmen who've been voting on this have no idea it's there. A paragraph saying, well, a public exchange can be two guys talking on a phone. So, just nullifying the whole effect of the legislation. That's one. I mean, I'm sure we don't know, I don't know, all the other sort of loopholes they've managed to craft for themselves in this legislation. I mean, there have been some good things that have happened.
Like what?
They are setting up a Consumer Finance Protection Agency. And hopefully this excellent lady, Elizabeth Warren, who's a Harvard Law School professor, who really doesn't like the banks and thinks acts on the presumption they're up to no good. And so she'll be running that, we hope. So there are a few good things that happen. But basically, I'm afraid, despite this disaster, fundamentals haven't changed.
So what should change? If you could write this legislation, what would you see in it?
Well, it's not just a question of legislation, but what should happen is that we shouldn't be, the focus of our economic policy shouldn't be, as it is right now, to preserve these huge institutions. These mega, they call the primary dealers, the mega banks, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, they're all basically, they should be insolvent. They've been kept, not so much Goldman Sachs now, but they are all getting rich or, repairing their fortunes at our expense.
The argument is that given the size of global trade and the amount of capital flows in the US and globally, you need institutions of this scale or you don't have enough, lubricant to keep the global economy going.
Yeah, but that's nonsense. They say that, but there are no economies of scale in banking. Even these banks. What are they saying? That that someone financing something needs a huge loan to do it, and you need a big bank to supply that loan. All banks, however big, they'll always get the money from all sorts of different places. You don't need a mega bank. In fact, as we found out, it's very dangerous when these banks get so huge that when they get themselves into trouble, which they seem very proficient at doing, that puts the whole economy at risk. Lehman Brothers, for example, give you an example. Lehman Brothers Bank, which famously went bankrupt over a year ago in September 2008. That going bankrupt almost pulled apart the global economy. They should never have been in that position. How come we had this bank which had went bankrupt through their own stupidity? Because they were buying, as the housing market was collapsing, they were buying more housing bonds. They were, what they were doing a lot of the time was outright fraud. They were overvaluing their real estate holdings by about $30 billion. They should have gone broke years ago. They should never have been allowed to get that big. And yet, we're being told that, because Lehman Brothers, they collapsed and that was, nearly brought down the global financial system, we've got to stop that happening again. The way to stop it happening again is to make sure these guys don't get that big.
But one of the arguments that's been given is that if you do need something at that scale because of the size and flow of the transactions, then there should be something public that does it. And given that so much public money saved this system anyway, some people have said either one of these things should have been nationalized or something public should have been created to play this role. What do you make of that idea?
Well, I don't. They have been national. I mean, most of them they are government. They have been government-supported enterprises. I mean, in effect, we control Citigroup. I mean, we the taxpayer. Not we seem to do much with our. Not that our representatives, Mr. Geithner, seem to do much with his power. In fact, he's very much on the side of Wall Street. No, what should have happened is we should have, not just let it collapse in a heap like with Lehman Brothers, because, they were. Amazingly, that caught them by surprise. But we should, there are efficient ways to collapse, to let these things go bankrupt. I mean, that's happening several times a week with smaller banks.
Yeah, 3 more just went this last week.
Exactly. And we seem to be able to manage that. We should apply the same thing to these huge banks, as indeed Sheila Bair, the boss of the FDIC that's, takes over these smaller bankrupt banks. That's what she keeps trying to do. And it's the power of Wall Street and the power of their representatives in this administration, particularly Mr. Geithner or Mr. Summers, that prevents her doing that.
Your point is the institution shouldn't be allowed to get so big. So how do you stop that from happening?
Well, I mean, when they get too big that they're insolvent, you should let them fail.
But by the time they get too big and then get insolvent and fail, there's an enormous destruction that takes place with all the pension funds and everything. Ordinary people's lives also get destroyed, not just the institution. So do you not need some regulatory or antitrust environment, something that actually stops them from getting there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they can only get that big. I mean, when you have these mega bank mergers, the mergers that create these mega banks, they all have to be approved by the Federal Reserve. I mean, you don't need legislation. You can just say, no, you can't do this.
Well, now then you get back to Ron Paul and the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve seems to be more an extension of the power of the banks than the power of any public interest over the bank.
Yeah, that's entirely true. But I mean, we need, therefore, a Federal Reserve that actually does its job.
What do you think of Ron Paul's legislation that seems to be passing through Congress now to make the Fed more accountable?
Oh, it's great. It's good for all sorts of reasons. In fact, including the fact that the Fed really hates it. And whenever you see Geithner questioned about it, he really squirms. I'm told, however, and I should have looked at this and I haven't, but if you look at the bill, that had, whatever it was, 300 and something co-sponsors in the Congress, the bank lobbyists, as you expect, have been at work. And, if you lift the stone, you'll find a lot of loopholes already that have been built into it. But that's what they don't get, is how angry people are about the way, what they've done, their irresponsibility and their greed and their stupidity. There's a lot of anger building up, and it's a shame, really, that the administration and also the Congress, through a certain amount of neglect, isn't responding to people's anger. The fact that President Obama said earlier this year, he told a group of the leading bankers, he said, my administration, that's all that's standing between you and the pitchforks. Well, why? Get out of the way, Obama. Let the pitchforks do their job.
Thanks very much for joining us, Andrew.
Hey, you're welcome.
And you can find the film American Casino tell us, Andrew, we're on the web. People can
We're on the
find
web
out
at americancasinothemovie.com. That's americancasinothemovie.com. And you can, learn much more about the film, and you can also get the DVD.
Thanks very much for joining us, and thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.